been a while since I uploaded a video, so this is my second attempt at video blogging. I'm sorry if I'm a bit rambly. I actually spent the last 3 days or so in hospital, or in and out of hospital. As it turns out, I have a pretty nasty ovarian cyst, and on Sunday night it leaked, or it did something, and I ended up in hospital sort of in agony and had to have a dose of morphine and generally had a pretty rough time of it. So I'm still a bit phased out by it all, but you know, managing. So yeah, I thought I would do an update and discuss a couple of things that have come up with my transition in the last month or so. One thing that has happened is I started seeing a counsellor, because in Australia, like a lot of places, you have to see a counsellor and or a psychiatrist before you go on testosterone. So I started seeing a counsellor, and she's very, very good, which is a rare thing for me to say, because typically I don't endorse many mental health professionals at all. I hate them. And this one is very, very good. She's based in Melbourne, which is where I live. And she raised some interesting questions for me. I come from a very difficult background, as I think I may have mentioned in my first video. I have an extensive history of bullying, particularly bullying from boys, and also bullying from male teachers, and my own father, who is a pretty horrible piece of work. So she asked me, where do you get your sense of masculinity from? On what basis do you feel yourself to be masculine? And I think that's a very good question, and I think it's one that all trans people, or FtM trans people, I guess it would be the other way around for male to female trans people, I think that's a question that everyone should ask themselves. Where does your sense of masculinity come from? What makes you a man? You know, what makes you male? So I've sort of worked on trying to answer that for myself, and have found it extremely difficult, because you have to sort of ask, where does your sense of masculinity come from? In my case, all my examples of masculinity early on were pretty damn negative, to be honest. My dad was, in many ways, a very masculine man, but he was also violent, he was abusive, he was emotionally abusive. He was a drug addict, and still is, using his injury as an excuse to fuel a drug addiction that really, in the end, has very little to do with what happened to him. And all the boys who bullied me at school were usually involved in gangs. They were often involved in drugs. The reason they picked on me was because I was different, you know, I was alone, I didn't have any support network, so I was quite an easy target. So it's interesting to consider where I frame my concept of being a man, of being male. And I've sort of worked out, scarily enough, a lot of my ideas of masculinity stem from pop culture. And that's quite a scary thing, considering what pop culture actually is. I mean, we are exposed to it all the time, and we're exposed to these ideas of what men and women ought to be through it. So it's kind of challenging to think about the origins of your own sense of masculinity. Like, for me, really, my positive male role models have always been these heroic types of people. Sports heroes, warriors of various kinds, soldiers, sort of archetypes more than actual people. And I suppose it would probably be different for FTMs who come from a less abusive and more normal, for lack of a better word, environment. I suppose they would be able to model more on their fathers. But for me, it's been a very challenging process. And that's something that has come up with my transition stuff. You know, I frame myself as a man through my ethics, through my morals, through my way of interacting with the world, through a general sort of sense of who I am. And I find some of those expectations of myself are really unrealistic. For example, being able to relate unemotionally to the world, or relate unemotionally to myself, to always be logical and critical, to be able to always have an opinion, to be the strong one in any given relationship. Those are all very powerfully pervasive images of the man in society. And I suppose those images and those concepts why you get this increasing sort of presence of people who sort of refer to themselves as male feminists, who aren't exactly feminists as such, but who promote male issues and male agendas, and some of them, the less palatable ones, go on about male oppression as well. I don't consider there to be a sense of male oppression, quoting little comma marks there, but there is a very strong delineation of what men should be. And if you don't have any personal positive male role models, that can be a very difficult thing to frame. So I'm sort of in the process now of working out what it is that I can expect from myself as a man, transitioning from female to male. So that's quite a challenging thing. The other thing that came up for me in this last month was also dealing with this ovarian cyst, because it's such a feminizing condition. I mean, you can't really get more female than dealing with gynecological problems. And it's forced me to acknowledge body parts that I always feared I was kind of comfortable with. I'm not sort of violently dysphoric, or at least most of the time. But having to deal with an internal pelvic ultrasound, which wasn't fun, and also just the general focus on these organs that are so specifically female, and the treatment I got in the hospital as well, I found that really, really challenging and really depressing as well. Like, it was very, very difficult to accept the way they treated me for it. Not only were they quite dismissive, because I didn't really show much in the way of my pain. When I'm in pain, I tend to be very stoic, and that may again tie into my own personal sense of masculinity. It's a fairly common knowledge that most men often don't seek treatment, even when they're in quite bad pain, because it's not considered to be something acceptable for a lot of men to do, particularly older men. It's something they often find very difficult to do. So I had that, and I also had the fact that it was purely feminizing, and they were calling me she right through the hospital, and they were talking to me like I was a woman. And sort of hearing that, and hearing them sort of saying, oh, well, you know, you might have problems with your fertility later on, I really couldn't give a shit. My fertility is the last thing on my mind. I have no desire to have babies. I never have. So, you know, them expressing all these very female problems to me, I found really, really odd. Like, it really didn't feel right for me at all. And that, as well as the physical stress and the pain itself and the whole thing of going into hospital, and I'm pretty phobic of hospitals, so I didn't enjoy that at all. All of that sort of contributed to this sense of really deep depression. Like, I feel utterly miserable at the moment. So yeah, that's sort of been the issues plaguing me on my transition so far. It's certainly gotten off to a pretty rough start. The good news is, of course, when I go on testosterone, the issues with the ovaries will probably stop, because my ovaries will shut down, and there probably won't be problems with pain during ovulation and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'm going to wrap this up. Anyone who's interested sort of to leave comments and stuff, feel free, and I'll get back to you. Thanks.